Hello everybody, and welcome another episode, which this time we talk about the IELTS test. In particular, we want to talk about one skill related to this, which is the writing skill. So, this is a skill that sometimes students feel afraid of or feel worried about. Simply put, because we may not always write for the same purposes that we have here. But no worries, no matter what is the reason that you are taking this test for, I'll do my best to help you achieve and score a high mark. Because one of the biggest mistakes, I believe, that students sometimes make is that they take the test without preparation. They just depend on the general fluency in English. But this is not enough for us. If we want to score a high mark, we need to make sure that we know how this test is assessed, that is, how it is evaluated. So, let's discuss the criteria that we have in order to score a high mark. The test itself consists of two parts. The writing skill consists of two parts. We have part 1 and part 2. We want to go over part 1 today in this video, but maybe we can have another video in which we go over part 2. The criteria will be useful for us to deal with part 1 and part 2, so I will go over them. But before that, I want you to know that in task 1, we're asked to describe a graph, a chart, a map, or even a process in 150 words. Here, we need to focus on trends, main trends, because we need to summarize them, and sometimes we need to compare data. In task 2, which is more complex and more challenging, we're asked to write a 250-word essay on a given topic. Of course, maybe we might be familiar with the content related to part 2 more, so although it seems to be more complex, in reality, I have a lot of friends who complained about part 1 or told me that they feel that they don't know what to do with part 1 because simply put, they're not used to it. Anyhow, the main tip that I have for you, whether we are dealing with this test for a scholarship or for a job or for whatever purposes, in order for me to score a high mark, in addition to knowing the criteria, I need to manage my time well. So try to finish task 1 in 20 minutes and leave enough time for task 2. Now, in my case, because I've been teaching writing for more than 15 years, and I am a journalist and a researcher and also a university professor, it was not difficult for me to deal with the writing test, and I want you to know that you can actually score a high mark. In fact, in my case, I scored 8.5 in the skill, and I managed to finish part 1 and part 2 in just 20 minutes. I wrote in part 1 500 words and in part 2 500 words as well. Now, if I can do it, then you can, of course, do it. It all depends on just knowing the criteria. So, when it comes to how you are assessed, we have task achievement. That is, did you manage to address the task fully? Were you able to cover all aspects that you are being asked about? The second criterion is coherence and cohesion, and this has to do with your ability to link your ideas together, to link your sentences. One sentence with the one that comes before or with the one that comes after. Of course, it's very important for us to use something that we call signposts or transitions. If I talk about an increase and then I talk about a decrease, I need to use in contrast, for example, because this will help the reader figure that I was talking about something and now I'm moving to the opposite. Instead of repeating the same word, I may refer to it with a synonym. Maybe I can use a pronoun. And this shows that I am able, actually, to talk about the same point in other words. Lexical resource, it has to do with your vocabulary. You know, when it comes to speakers and learners of a language, we have levels. C1 speaker, C2. Well, the same applies to words. We have words that are considered to be from the A1 category, from the A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. If you are aiming to score a high mark, that is maybe 7 and higher, then you have to work on vocabulary items related to this. Now, with technology, it's not difficult for you to access these words. You can even ask ChatGPT, actually, to provide you with a list of vocabulary items that might be useful for you. Grammatical range and accuracy, this has to do with your ability to use different structures. So let's say if you're asked to talk about video games and their benefits, and instead of just saying the first benefit is, the second benefit is, the third benefit is, which is so repetitive and basic, you can once use the first benefit is, and then maybe the second time you want to talk about a benefit, you can use another structure, like learning or improving your vocabulary is one thing that you can achieve through video games. Or video games enable us not just to enjoy our time, but they add to our lexicon or to our linguistic repertoire. Also, when it comes to grammatical range and accuracy, it's very important for us to be familiar with sentence types: simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. And if you want to excel, then you need to focus on complex and compound complex sentences. Now, let's see a real example to understand what we mean by these criteria. So look at this for a few seconds. Do you understand how to handle this or what to do? Will you maybe ask the question like this? The chart below shows the percentage of adults participating in different types of physical activities in a country in 2010 and 2020. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. If I didn't train, or if I don't receive training, then I may feel lost. There are so many things here to talk about, and I have a time limit, and I need to finish part 1 and move to part 2. What shall I do? What shall I start with? What shall I write in the body? What shall I write in the conclusion? You'll feel stressed and nervous, and you may not score a high mark. And this is why here in this video, I'm trying to help you out. So, to score a high mark, we need to know the major trends in a chart like this one. We need to focus on the major trends or the significant changes, and we also need to highlight the minor changes as well. So if you return to it and you concentrate, you can see that on top we have participation in different physical activities in 2010 and 2020. On the left hand, we have numbers and we have percentage of adults. And towards the bottom, we have years from 2010 to 2020. Now, what major changes can you see here? If you zoom in, then you probably can see that we have an increase, a significant one, in one of the activities, and we have the opposite, that is a decline in another one. So for me, as a writer, I need to be able to highlight this to the reader. And I should also refer to the other changes. I shouldn't ignore them, or otherwise I will not be scoring a high mark in task achievement. So how to do that? Let me just show you a sample. I can say the line chart shows that in both 2010 and 2020, jogging was the most popular activity among adults, with participation increasing significantly from 30% in 2010 to 45% in 2020. Notice if you return to the chart, then you can easily tell that we have this significant increase in jogging. And you can also notice that we have the opposite in another activity. That is, conversely, and I need to use conversely because this is a transition, a signpost that would, of course, please anyone who is evaluating my sample and also would make the life of the reader easier. So conversely, yoga declined from 20% to 10% over the same period. Why do you use over the same period? Because I don't want to repeat the same expression that is from 2010 until 2020. Here, this is repetitive. It doesn't show that I am aware or that I have lexical resources and the ability to have cohesion and coherence through using different forms. I'm done. I move on to talk about cycling and gym activities. They saw slight increases from 15 to 20% and 25 to 30% respectively. This word respectively is so important because if I don't mention it, then I have to repeat the two activities again, or to repeat their names, and this will weaken my sample. Now, this is not the right way to answer this question. I'm just showing you how we can talk about trends. And before I show you the structure for this answer, for this question, or the right structure, I want to ask you if you can analyze with me and see why, for instance, this response is weak. The chart shows that people in 2010 and 2020 did different exercises. Many people liked jogging and some liked other exercises. Now here we will not score a high mark in task achievement. Although on the face of it, we are actually talking about the chart, but in reality, we miss so many things here. Before I show you the right structure, can I ask you to spend maybe a few seconds, and you can use your phone actually and take a picture of this, to look at this and then to try to figure out what trends do you see here? Is it stable or do we have changes here? And if I have changes, then how do I talk about these changes? You can try your luck, or you can see with me these expressions that we can use. So, some useful expressions to describe a trend are shows a downward trend, shows a downward trajectory, shows an upward trend, an upward trajectory. I can also refer to expressions like rise steadily, rise slightly, rise gradually, drop slightly, drop gently. I can say decline sharply, significantly, rapidly, abruptly. And I can also refer to fluctuations. So these expressions can help me to talk about the chart that I showed you a minute ago. Without them, I may not know how to talk about the changes. That is, I see the changes, but I don't know how to talk about them. You see? So for you to check this out with me, I can say electricity consumption showed an upward trend over the decade, increasing steadily from 2010 to 2020. And I can say there was a slight dip, if you notice with me, in consumption around 2013. If you look at the year 2013, you will see a dip. And this dip, of course, was followed by a rapid recovery, increase. Instead of saying increase, I can say by a rapid recovery and a consistent upward movement from 2015 onward, instead of saying from 2015 up to 2016, up to 2017 and 18 and so on. I can say from 2015 onward. So knowing these expressions will make my life easier. Now, how to address a question like this, or how to write 150 words, this might be your concern. So I want to return to the structure. For me to score an excellent mark, I need to divide my summary into parts. In part 1, I provide a general summary, focusing on the major trends without tackling percentages. In part 2, I describe the first key change in detail. In part 3, I describe the second key change thoroughly. In part 4, I describe other slight minor changes, and I finally conclude by reiterating what I said or what I mentioned earlier. All right? So, if we return to our chart earlier, this is the chart that we dealt with. I need, as I mentioned, more than one part. In the first part, I'll provide a general summary without talking about statistics or numbers. So let's see if this is applied in the structure that I have. So, look at part 1. The line chart illustrates the percentage of adults participating in 4 types of physical activities. I need to mention all of them here. Jogging, yoga, cycling, and gym workouts. In the years 2010 and 2020, I need to mention these years here. Then I would say, overall, jogging saw a notable increase. I need adjectives to describe the increase. A notable increase in participation over the decade. Instead of repeating now 2010 to 2020, I can use a word like this. While yoga experienced a decline. Both cycling and gym workouts showed a slight upward trend in popularity. Now, if I just try this alone, I will score a low mark. I need, as I mentioned, to divide my summary into parts. Now I need to return to the first major trend, and I need to talk about it in details. Once I'm done, I move to the other major trend, and I talk about it thoroughly. Then I talk about the minor changes, and finally I conclude. So if you look at part 2 here, we have in 2010, jogging was engaged in by about 30% of adults, making it one of the more popular activities. This figure rose significantly. I don't want to continue using increase. Over the next 10 years, instead of talking about decade or talking about 2010 and 2020, I can say over the next 10 years. And by this, I show anybody who's evaluating my sample that I can talk about the same idea in different words. Reaching 45 in 2020. This increase made jogging the most common physical activity among adults by the end of the period. So I need to comment on it. I don't just want to describe, but I need to be able to provide comments. Now that I'm done with this, and because I'm talking about a decline and it's the opposite, I need to start with a transition. In contrast, yoga saw a decline, starting with a 20% participation rate in 2010. Yoga dropped to approximately 10 by 2020. And I continue. Once I'm done, I move to the minor changes. I describe them, and then Now, the last thing that I want you to be aware of is this: numbers. This makes a huge difference, and it does impress the examiner when they check and when they evaluate and see your samples. That is, instead of saying or writing 10%, you can say 1 in 10. Instead of writing 20%, you can say a fifth. And instead of 25, you can say 1 quarter, and so on. Trust me, if you use these with numbers and you use the other expressions that I talked to you about, and you follow the structure, I'm pretty sure that the next time you see part 1, you will not feel stressed and nervous, and you will know what to do. Now, that would be it for this part. I would like to thank you, and I hope to be able to create another one for part 2. So if you feel interested, or if you feel that this is of a benefit and you want me to create part 2, please let me know in the comments. And thank you all for listening. Have a good one.